It has been a hell of a long time since I have felt called to record an episode or anything like this, so I'm gonna roll with it. Welcome, everyone. It's been a while. It's been a very long while. But I'm here, still kicking, gratefully doing very well, considering, the state of our country. I'm not even going to say the world at this point, because a lot of them are looking on with horror. A lot of them are looking on saying that they saw this coming for a while. A lot of us did. And, we very much have tried to warn everyone, right? Hashtag this is not a drill. I'm so hard not to say we told you so, but we did. And for a period of time since the election, I have been very much grieving the fact that our voices, trans people especially, matter, and we have been screaming from the rooftops in the most digestible way about, what this administration had planned, and the fact that Project 2025 has been out there forever. I really don't know if people grasped the fact that for those 4 years of Biden, they didn't just sit there and not plan for exactly what was going to happen, right? Some of the greatest minds in the country, billionaires who are able to pay for whatever, all of that. So this isn't just all of a sudden, right? This has been in the making for the last 8 years at least. My mind, this is so wild, has just gotten to the point where I could even go back and forth with what had been the outcome had Biden lost and Trump had just had his other 4 years, and now he'd be at the end of his terms, and I don't think we'd be in as bad of a state. So the fact that Truth Social came out right after the election and became very popular, the insurrection, all of that stuff, every single court decision that's been made and publicized, and the Jeffrey Dahmer files, and all of this stuff came out, and people still voted for him, whether that election was hacked or not. Doesn't really matter at this point, because nobody's doing anything about it. And as far as, my thought processes and what's maybe the plan at this point, now that a lot of people have stopped spiritually bypassing about the election, and, all this, people are finally accepting the fact that there's not, Kamala wasn't going to get in there before Inauguration Day, Trump wasn't going to be president for a day. All of that stuff obviously didn't happen. And now that people are finally moving through their period of grief, which a lot of us started doing, election night, the 4 a.m. club, that's trigger grief. I woke up that night too, but it sure as hell wasn't because, I knew something was wrong, but it wasn't because he didn't win. So now that we're all finally, in the understanding that this is where we're at for more than 4 years, because these effects are going to take decades to unwork, and they are systematically dismantling and removing the Constitution itself. They do not want anyone to have law of the land except the president, the current president. And, it's very, I have days where I do very much just want to curl up into a ball. And now I've allowed myself on those days to do it for 30 to 45 minutes and then get up because we got way too much going on business-wise and personally and all of that. So that's where I'm at on this. I have gone through the stages of, like, obviously I had that video where I was blaming every Republican out there. We're all allowed to process our grief how we want to process it, and in that moment and in that I think that's the last time I actually posted anything. That was on TikTok. That was very much, anger, and rage. So now I'm just like, the reality I got to through dealing with that, though, taking a look at that and going deeper, was realizing that, like, the true reality for me is that this is not a lesson that I have to learn about compassion, empathy, actual empathy, not advocating for yourself, like all of the things that I have been, trying to say for years on here and through social media and through my personal one-on-one conversations with people, just really trying to remind people of, their sovereignty and their ability to make their choices, right? And to take accountability for those choices. So after the election, I went through like a moment where I was like, did I not reach enough people? Like, did I not interact with enough people? Like, I've had all of these opportunities to publicly be in front of people and as myself. And so I was able to really like move past that very quickly, because I do believe that I did everything I very much could for the last couple of years, at least, ever since I started transitioning and realizing that, like, I was walking into a minefield. Like, I knew from the moment that I came out publicly and socially, and then started to do hormone replacement therapy, where I was like, yeah, I'm gonna need to move past people pleasing, and I'm gonna need to find self-love, and I'm gonna need to remove myself from toxic environments. Being trans allows me to immediately know people I'm safe with and people I'm not safe with, like, just for existing and them seeing me, and I've gotten very good at, reading the rooms and not being hyper vigilant about it, especially lately, because lately I in the last 6 months especially, have really come to a deeper knowing and understanding, and received, some confirmation, some validation from, people whose opinions I trust and value, and have allowed myself to finally discover, like, what that missing piece was, because I kept searching, it felt, for, like, the full story of, like, who am I, what is missing. And I had felt at the time, that I really had tried every avenue, and I had tried to become more knowledgeable about all things. But funny enough, what ended up being what I thought was the end of, one path, ended up surprising me and being exactly the key that I needed. So, what do I mean? Well, if you know me or followed me for a long time, like really followed me on socials, you know that at one time, a couple years ago, I wanted to get a DNA test because I wanted to find out if I was related to my family. I had a past as an infant with some SA from my grandmother, and the reality is she pimped me out as an infant. And when I started realizing this and understanding it, and it had taken me years of like talk therapy, to get to this point of, remembering. But I wanted to know, if maybe I had actually been fully trafficked, right? I've been calling it trafficking for years because, like, the reality of what it really was is really just horrible, right? It's just like the idea of pimping out an infant. But I had always like wondered for years, through a lot of the inappropriate adults that did things with me as a young child, even, and as a adolescent. I just never really understood why I was so special. Like, what was so... Because I didn't feel special, you know what I mean? And I had been conditioned to... 11:22. I had been conditioned to not think that I was special, even, right? Like, I was just a nobody that took up space and shouldn't even exist. And that's how I grew up feeling, And so, as a trans person, when people treat me like that, I'm just like, I already moved, I already felt that. I already lived that experience. I'm not gonna allow myself to continue to put myself in that place of trauma as an adult now, having gone through everything that I've gone through, fallen down a million times, gotten back up. Sometimes not for a minute, I just stayed down and I wanted to, it was escapism, but I still raised myself back up. And I've always had a good heart, and I've always thought the best of people and wanted the best for them. So, turned out that, I was related to my family, which was actually more disheartening because I was more sad because I was like, well, that means they should have actually treated me a lot better. I actually should not have gone through what I had gone through. It would have made more sense if they were complete strangers and had bought me, or stolen me. And so eventually went down a couple other rabbit holes, random conspiracy theories, and dropped it for a long time, like over a year and a half. But one thing that I stumbled upon randomly about 6 months ago was what they do on 23andMe, which is called a DNA painting. And so they have this chart, and it has all of your chromosomes and your sex chromosomes. And it has it listed out, and you could see which is dominant, which is recessive. It's really cool, right? So I'm like, oh, I love this shit. Always been into genetics. Like, it's just like something about it that I've always been into, even in high school. So I noticed as I went down the painting that under sex chromosomes it had XY, but X was lit up twice, and so it was like reading as like XXY. And I looked at it, and I was like, and then I went to Google, and I was like typing in, like, because I'm very good at like search engines and like finding what I need through the internet quickly, and then finding reliable sources if I need from there. And so I ended up going through a Reddit where somebody had mentioned that as well, and one of the comments had stated that XXY would indicate intersex. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've heard of intersex. Now, just like when I started transitioning, I didn't have a very clear idea of who trans people were because it had not been around me my whole life, pretty much. I'd only seen it on TV, and like television shows, not even like news. And so it wasn't until like high school when I found out about Stonewall and Marsha P. Johnson, and like that there are trans people that exist in the world. I was 17. And so I ended up also reading, like, someone commented and said, 23andMe states that they are not a final decision as to, if your chart reads XXY, you'll need to find other testing and such. And so I went back to my DNA painting and I looked at it, and then I was like, okay, well, I obviously need to understand more about intersex. What is intersex? And so that's where I started, researching, learning, understanding that. Because in my mind, it was that someone who was born with, like, physical organs on the outside of the body, and externally. And so I just assumed, I guess in my ignorance, that was the only situation. And so obviously that's not my situation. I had no idea that internally you could have organs or characteristics of both sexes. And so as I started to read more, I was like, okay, well, this can't be the final, obviously I'm not just going to read this and interpret it and then be like, I'm intersex. So then I started to research into, like, well, what are the physical characteristics? What are some of the characteristics of people who are intersex? And as I started to, like, read down this list of characteristics, it was just like check mark, check mark, check mark, right down to like my muscle mass, like the way I carry myself, the gait, like, just, it was just the weight, it was just like the bone structure, it was just like all of that. And then I get to the point where it's like surgical, thing, specific internal things that needed to happen, that were medical. And so on that list, specifically, the only one really that I saw was for those who present male. During puberty, they would encounter what was called undescended testicle. And when I was 12, my dad took me to the doctor. It was the doctor that my stepmom worked for. And mind you, again, I've said this so many times, the man never took us to the doctor. I don't know why. Like, there were times where I was near death, literally near death. And the man did not take me to the doctor. And so, yeah, I had that. We went in to the doctor. It was like a few minutes. Then he said, oh, you have this. And I said, well, what is that? He said, oh, it just happens. I've carried these memories forever, y'all. Oh, it just happens. And, we'll need to do surgery. And so I was like, all right, well, what does that entail? And he's like, well, we can either remove it or we can bring it down and place it back, where it needs to be. And I was like, well, if you remove it, will that keep me from being able to have children? And he said, you are very astute and quite knowledgeable and aware to ask these questions. These are very good questions. And he said, no, it should not, keep you from being able to have children. And so, flash forward, right? I'm going in for the surgery, like a couple months later. And so we get into the surgery, come out of the surgery, I wake up, the doctor comes in after a bit, And he's like, all right, well, we took care of it. Surgery is a success. And then he was like, oh, and by the way, while we were in there, we found a hernia, so we took it out. I was like, all right, thank you. Like, it was just very like, okay, thanks for doing your job. Like, I'm 12. I do remember after having a lot of pain after the surgery, and the incision was like right between my stomach, like on my torso, and like it was like just a little higher up from, everything, but not quite as high up as like my stomach, my belly button. This was like, so there was just a lot of pain. I could not use the restroom on my own. I had to basically just go on myself, like, for days. It was really traumatic. I ended up staying with my mom, and my parents were divorced, and so I was there with her, and I was, like, in her bed, and, like, she did not care about any of that. Like, she was just like, I just want you to be okay. And, yeah, it was, and I haven't, I've always had, like, this weird pain there, like, my whole life, just, like, it's always been numb, like, it's just, I never went back to the doctor, like, they never took us back for, like, post-care or whatever. They were like, your stitches will fall out, you'll be fine. If you have any problems, come back. And so, never had that, never went back to the doctor, like, just always written it on my, things. I had that surgery. Anywho, that to be said, when I started to really research about people who are intersex, I realized that some people, they are born with internal organs, both. And so at this point, I'm still kind of like, even with all of this in front of me, I'm just not somebody who's gonna, like, force a label on themselves. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna, like, put myself in another situation where, like, I have people against me without good cause, like, unless that's who I am. And so then I started to research about how, like, hormone replacement therapy can help with some people who want to, correct and or, shift genders. And so I had already done this instinctively. Like, it's very wild to me that I had already gone through all of these motions just on my own, to get to this point to where I just feel so empowered in, like, who I am. And, like, people may think I'm a freak, they may think I'm weird. I don't care. Like, that's your judgment. Like, that just proves to me that you are not a decent, compassionate person that I need to have anything to do with. Like, I don't even want to waste my time with y'all anymore. Like, go learn that lesson somewhere else. Like, learn the education somewhere else. Like, I was able to do it for myself for so long, and so that's not why I'm here anymore. I'm just here to live my truth, like, period. Like, I don't need to educate anybody else about anything. Try doing that. Like, enough people didn't want to listen, and now you're going to learn the hard way, and, like, have it. Like, I don't have to accept any of that from anybody ever again. People absolutely love me 100%, who I am, without having to quiet myself or silence myself to make other people comfortable, ever. They'd rather be uncomfortable, right? And live in that uncomfort and want to be a part of my life than the opposite. So, and then to avoid it, because I'm not doing avoidance and neglect and conditional love anymore, period. I don't have to. So, yes. So luckily, I had already started, my hormone replacement therapy, and so I ended up calling the clinic that I used to be a patient of, and I'm not a patient there anymore, but I, contacted my old caseworker, and so explained to them kind of what was going on. and asked if there was like, because I had heard about this thing called karyotype testing where you could test and find out like what your actual, genetics are. Like what would be your XXXY, XY, XXY. And like, there's so many variations. There's not just the three. And so those different variations can determine which type of intersex you are. It's all a spectrum, period. It's always been a spectrum, all of it. This is why it can't just be one or the other, ever, because it completely erases intersex people, which I'm jumping ahead of myself. So, I asked the lady, she said she wasn't sure 100%. She didn't think that they did that, and that she wasn't sure if she could give me any information because I'm not a patient anymore or a client anymore. And so I said, okay, I understood. And I just kind of dropped it. Like, I was just like, all right, well, done. Radical acceptance. Like, even with all of this in front of me, I'm not just going to say that's what it is. I don't, period. And so some time went by. 2 weeks went by, actually. And then I got a call back, and it was the caseworker, and she told me that even though I wasn't a client anymore, I had been a client at one time, and that she really had just been so moved, by what I had told her, and this self-discovery, I'm gonna get emotional, this self-discovery journey that I am on. And so she said we did actually do the karyotype testing because we need to make sure before we administer any of those prescriptions and those medications that, you are, so we know where to start from. And she was like, you are XXY. And we just kind of assumed that you maybe knew, or if you didn't know, because of HIPAA, we didn't want to get involved in any of that. So yes, you are intersex. And so I was very grateful, I was like, thank you so much. I don't know where that puts me as far as like going back on hormones, but I was very appreciative of her, still figuring that, navigating that. Also, we're not allowed to. So, yeah, I was very grateful. And at that point, I was able to, accept, move into that acceptance of like, okay, I am this. I guess what I had not been prepared for at the time was when I realized that, well, what was, did they take, was it a hernia or was it something else, that they took from me? And also, who knew? Like, did my parents know? Like, did my dad know? Like, obviously the doctor knew. Like, and then, like, what did they take? I'm sure that could have, like, driven some people crazy. Like, they would have just gone this whole, like, self-sabotage, like, burn everything down, like, get justice for yourself. But really, at this point, I'm just like, it's gone. Like, it's gone. And as much as I'm finding out at this point about it finally and feeling so complete and like who I am and like being like I've always been both, right? It's like this lie or narrative that you have to be one or the other and you can't be one if you've been the other, you know what I mean? Or this idea of, well, you don't have what biological women have. Yeah, well, obviously I did. And now, as I've, finally moved into acceptance of, that this happened and, all of that, it feels like all of those pains and the recovery and like the experiences of that, it's like knowing how the sensations that I feel now as an adult, and the things that have been for so long ever since then, for as long as, whatever. It's like knowing that I had a uterus and they took that. So at 12 years old, I had a hysterectomy. Had no idea about it. And the only way to really find out is to go in and spend thousands of dollars for imaging. And if anybody who's hearing this thinks that I need to go do that before you're going to accept what I'm telling you right now, then you are part of those people that I want nothing to do with. Period. And if you feel that way, you better not ever tell me. Because I will block, mute myself, and remove myself so quickly from your life. There's not one single person in this world who is going to take away the fact that at 12 years old, I had a hysterectomy and I had no idea. That is who I am. I stand on that. And this person, right now, speaking to every single person out there listening to this, does not play. We have a good life. We have a thriving business. I have love. I have family. I have friends. I don't need anything else in this entire world. I have my whole complete story of who I am. And unless you are somebody else who has that, do not speak to me about anything about who I am. You don't know me better than I know myself. That's for damn sure. Period. And I still love people. I still choose kindness. I still want the world to find its way. A lot of people in my position and in my experience and what I've gone through do not feel that way. So, that's why I've been quiet. I have just been very happily sitting with myself and being very comfortable and showing it in the world, and people who have interacted with me and have seen that change in the last few months and have seen me really step into who I am. This is why. Period. This is why I am a very special person. So, you better treat it right. Treat me right, or you can get out of my sight. Period. Alright, y'all. I feel very just good. I'm glad. The little inner Haley is 12-year-old me is fuck yeah. Liberation. And, the world is completely on fire. So, at this point, all we can do is celebrate the small victories. Get out there. Find your community. We got great ones popping up here. Go out to your local farmers markets. That is a great place to find it. You'll find one. So you'll find a friend there for sure. Damn, y'all. I'm excited. All right. Have a great day. Love y'all. Bye.